House will come to order. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Abler motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2294, an act relating to state government. Abler moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 294, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House, and that the House request that a like committee be appointed by the Senate.
Call on the member from Anoka, Representative Abler, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Senate took a little different approach than we did, and I think a good conversation is ordered, so I would suggest that we do not concur and appoint conferees and have a good process.
Discussion of the Abler motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Abler motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Garofalo motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment to concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2949, an act relating to education. Garofalo moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2949, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call on the member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is my motion.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Garofalo motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is a Sanders motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to Senate File 2296, an act relating to election. The Senate has respectfully requested that a conference committee be appointed thereon. Senate conferees are Chamberlain, Wolf, and Bonner. Sanders moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate. What's this stuff? I don't know. What's that? Oh, Sanders. Yeah. Sanders. I know how it goes. There it is. Dale was printing stuff, and I was patching stuff. She's doing the pilot. Yes.
Call on the member from Anoka, Representative Sanders, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is the conference report, and I request we go to conference committee.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Sanders motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. This is the Erdahl motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to the following Senate File 2493, an act relating to natural resources. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. Senate conferees are Ingebrigtsen, Carlson, and Saxhog. Erdahl moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses on Senate File 2493.
Call the member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, we have some relatively minor differences we need to work out with the Senate and need to go to conference committee.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Erdahl motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the adoption of the Senate of the following Senate concurrent resolution herewith transmitted. Senate concurrent resolution number 11, a Senate concurrent resolution relating to delivery of bills to the governor after final adjournment. The resolution is being referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Conference Committee on House Files. The clerk report the Conference Committee report on House File 1816.
Conference Committee report. This is the Benson M motion. Conference Committee report on House File 1816, an act relating to public safety. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees, have for House File 1816 report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report signed by all three conferees on the part of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate. Benson M moves that the report of the Conference Committee on 1816 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by Conference Committee.
I recognize the author of the bill from Olmsted, Representative Benson M., who will explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 1816 is a bill that allows for manufacturers, dealers, and importers the ability to possess suppressors, silencers, if you will, for firearms for the sole purpose of being able to sell to law enforcement in the DNR. The Senate took the House language and it passed unanimous in the Senate, and it passed with 91 votes to the affirmative in the House.
Discussion to the report. All those in favor of the adopting the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1816 as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is still a bad bill. It aids in the problems that we have, especially in the inner cities. When I spoke against this before, I told about how silencers destroy the ability of shot spotters, which have greatly reduced the shootings in the inner cities. Somebody from the other side challenged it and said that that was wrong. Just last week I confirmed with the police that it does destroy the effectiveness of shot spotters. So in essence, if you're voting for this, it's a good help for people that can get away with more shootings.
Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Paymar.
Mr. Speaker, I know this bill is going to pass out of here, but I would just hope that you would consider. I wish this body would have observed a moratorium on further liberalizing gun issues this legislative session. I think the body made an error in passing the Stand Your Ground bill that passed out of this House, and fortunately the governor vetoed that bill, and we all saw the ramifications of what a bill like that can do with the tragedy that happened in Florida. This is liberalizing our gun bills even further. There is, I think, some controversy about whether law enforcement supports this or opposes it or is neutral. I would suspect that most law enforcement in the metropolitan area would be opposed to it or neutral. And I just think now is not the time to be liberalizing our gun laws in light of what's happened, and we should look at these in a broader context in the next legislative session. I hope we vote no on the conference report.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 83 ayes and 41 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. Its title is agreed to.
Conference Committee report. This is the Benson M motion. Conference Committee report on House File 2239, an act relating to motor vehicle. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees of House File 2239, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all three conferees on the part of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate. Benson M moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 2239 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by Conference Committee.
I recognize the author, the member from Olmsted, represent Benson M, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the bill that clarifies the titling, licensing of Pioneer cars, those manufactured before 1935, putting some safeguards in to statute to make sure that the cars are represented the way they're supposed to be, and giving some assurance to the people who are making all the investment in these cars that they will retain their value because they'll be titled in the year that they were actually manufactured. The bill had a slight technical, just adding an "and," but otherwise the Senate adopted the House language.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adopting the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The Chief Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2239, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the Clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 125 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. Its title is agreed to.
Conference Committee report. This is the Quam motion. Conference Committee report on House File 2128. An act relating to health. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 2128, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all three conferees on the part of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate. Quam moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 2128 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
Recognize the author, the member from Olmsted, represent Quam, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is the Emergency Services Personnel and Equipment Update Bill. The Senate was convinced that the House language was better, and so they receded from its amendment, and I'm asking that you again support this bill.
Discussion. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report on House File 2128 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The Chief Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2128 as amended by Conference Committee.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the Clerk will take the roll.
Kim, what is this?
The clerk will close the roll. Representative Benson M. votes aye. There being 125 ayes, 0 nays, the bill as amended by conference is repassed. Its title is agreed to. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. Dean, for the Committee on Rules, pursuant to Rule 121, designates the following bills to be placed on the supplemental calendar for today, for Monday, April 16, 2012. Senate File 2360, House File 2463, Senate File 1717, House File 2500, Senate File numbers 2181, 288, and 2464, House File number 2614, Senate File number 2183, House File numbers 2647 and 2627, and Senate File number 753.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar today is House File 2705. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2705, number 21 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to commerce.
Calling the member from Hennepin, Representative Mazorol, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. House File 2705 is an amendment to the statute regarding real estate license closures. And this is a bill that would seek to exclude attorneys, licensed real estate brokers, banks and other financial institutions, and title insurance companies from having to be licensed in order to do real estate closings. This is actually a correction. In 2010, the Commerce Department Technical Corrections Bill neglected to, in a cross-referencing, neglected to exclude these professions. They had been excluded in prior law. This bill is proposed by the State Bar Association and is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce.
Discussion to the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Mazorol, for the bill. We had a good discussion about it in committee, and I think it's a pretty straightforward bill. I support it, and I urge a yes vote.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2705.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll.
It's not going to pick up any further. He's aiming younger. Well, that's what he's. I know that's what he's. I know he's aiming younger than that. Carly saved from him, not from Meg.
There being 125 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. Its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar today is Senate File 1964. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
He's the best looking guy at the Capitol, according to him. No. Yeah.
Senate File 1964, number 14 on the calendar, the first engrossment, an act relating to labor and industry.
Members, before we have Representative Stensrud present his bill, if you could all please check your microphones. I believe somebody's microphone is either off its holder or open, and we don't need to have the private conversations on the House tape. Calling the member from Hennepin, Representative Stensrud. Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Point of information, it was Representative Falk's microphone, and they need fixing because he was talking about you. It's a good thing you didn't hear what he said.
Thank you for the point of parliamentary inquiry, Representative Rukavina. The member from Hennepin, Representative Stensrud, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill changes the building code to include window cleaning in the building code to require the installations of safety anchors on new constructed buildings that are 4 stories and greater. And it will really impacts the new construction and those that would include or involve a significant remodel or renovation on the roof structures. And this will really allow for regular maintenance and cleaning and repair on these sites in a secure and a safe way. And this bill does have bipartisan support, and I would appreciate your support for this bill.
Discussion. The member from Rams, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd like to thank the author of the bill. He's done a good job including all groups on this particular bill and taking into consideration, and I hope we all can send this out with a big green vote.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading.
3rd reading, Senate File 1964.
3rd reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 117 ayes and 8 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar today is House File 2861. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2861, number 17 on the calendar for today, an act relating to local government.
I call on the member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2861 is a result of a problem that was brought to my attention, particularly in rural Minnesota. Currently, towns and townships are allowed to make donations, grants to hospitals that serve their area, but they are not allowed under statute to make contributions to first responders that would include such groups as paramedics, EMTs, and volunteer ambulance crews. Funding for these kinds of services is particularly difficult to come by sometimes in rural areas, but we can all imagine that these services are really a lifeline for folks where hospitals may be 30 miles or more away. The bill would allow grants to be made to these kinds of first responders with restrictions. First of all, the recipients must be trained and licensed as required by law. The grant would need to be approved at the annual or specially called meeting so that the voters would have an opportunity to weigh in on it. I would point out that this is not a mandate. This is an option for local governments. It is supported by the Minnesota Association of Townships, and there is no known opposition to the bill.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative LeMieur yield to a question?
Representative LeMieur will yield,
but... I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I meant McElfatrick.
Representative McElfatrick will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McElfatrick, does this allow local governments to give grants to agencies that may be for-profit as well as non-profit? In other words, anybody that they see fit who provides these services, they can give a grant of taxpayer money to? Is that what I'm understanding here?
The member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick.
As defined in this bill, it says, or to an emergency medical service agency as defined in certain statute that serves the city or town. The grants must be authorized by the voters.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, if she would continue to yield.
She will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative McElfatrick, I thought I heard you say that it has to be approved by the voters. And if you could explain that. But also, from what you just explained doesn't really tell me if some of these could be actually for-profit companies. Could you clarify that, please?
The member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The residents of the area must be give the approval in response to your first comment, and as defined under emergency services person means an individual employed or receiving compensation to provide out-of-hospital emergency medical services. But it does also include, the bill would cover volunteers as well.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative McElfatrick. I'm still a little bit unclear whether this means that it could be a for-profit entity. Under the bill, of course, there's no, okay, I guess it says in the case of a town upon an affirmative vote of the town electors. Okay. All right, so Representative McElfatrick, I'm still unclear whether this could be given to a private company. I mean, obviously, we have different, you explained it could be a volunteer company, that's fine. I'm just kind of wondering if, you know, if there's any other limitation on this. But I won't ask you to yield again, but I do think it raises some questions. And as I understand it, if she would yield one more time, Mr. Speaker.
She will yield. Representative Liebling, 1 minute, please. Members, if you could, please. Take your conversations to the alcoves, or better yet, the retiring room, so Representative McElfatrick can hear Representative Liebling's question. Representative Liebling, you do have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative McElfatrick, I don't think this bill went through any of the health committees. I think it just went through government operations, and that's all well and good, but that's probably why I have some questions about it. I mean, it relates to delivery of medical services, and I guess I'd like to ask you, you know, if you know, because I know you don't have total control over this, but why this wouldn't have gone to Representative Gottwald's committee?
The member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative. This doesn't change the way the service is delivered. It specifically states that these people must be trained and licensed in accordance with law. So that's probably why it did not need to go through any of the Health and Human Services. It doesn't change how their service is delivered.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, that may be true, Representative McElfatrick, in a sense, but the way we finance health services definitely does change the way they're delivered in the state, and we have a separate committee that deals with health and human service financing, and it seems to me that, you know, we have all kinds of things we finance in the state that have to do with health and human services, and usually those things are discussed in the Health and Human Service committees because they do impact our system as a whole. And I do recognize that often in the rural areas we do have a problem with delivery of services. We've seen some bills this session to try to address that. I just wish I would have had an opportunity in committee to learn a little bit more about this. It could be perfectly fine. If there are some issues with it that impact our system, I guess we don't know that just hearing the bill on the floor.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would Representative McElfatrick yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, you had mentioned in the initial comment about, I believe it was the Minnesota Association of Townships. I was wondering, other groups, League of Minnesota Cities, Coalition, and others, did they come out and support the bill, or was it simply the township group?
The member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick.
The Association of Townships was the primary agency, or organization rather, that supported this because this is an area primarily for rural Minnesota to be needing to be addressed. There was no other opposition either in committee or apart from committees. So.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the representative would yield again.
She will yield. Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, here's what I'm, in part of that, because I'm looking at the text of the bill. It says on line 1.10, private, nonprofit, or public hospital that serves the city or town, and then it's a vote by the city and the town board in the case of a town, do the township officers, can they do this on the behalf of a township, or is it just the city and the towns have the money and they can make the grant to someone who's serving townships? I'm trying to find the township part of this bill.
The member from Itasca, Representative McElfatrick.
This was brought to my attention by a township. This is a limitation on them, and the funds must be approved at an annual meeting or a specially called meeting. This is an extension of what they're already allowed to do with a hospital. It just expands the perimeter.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think the member from Olmsted was onto something that you need to pay attention to. One of my concerns about this is that if we are talking about publicly developed emergency medical services, of course they wouldn't need grants. They would already be funded from taxpayer funding. That's what taxes are for. However, what we're talking about here is making grants. That leads one to believe that we're talking about sending grants to private institutions. Now, the grant is not free money. The grant is taxpayer money, and is that an appropriate use of taxpayer money? Or if it is taxpayer money, should it be a public service? I think the member from Olmsted was on to something, and everyone needs to think about this as they vote on this issue. But I'm going to vote no and hope you can join me.
Discussion. Seeing no amendments at the desk, clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2861.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Morrow votes aye. Members, if you could please, I'll ask the chief clerk to reopen the board as a number of members were not at their desk to vote. If you could please stay by your desks so that while we're moving through the process you can vote accordingly. Chief clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please do vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 113 ayes and 14 nays, the bill is passed as title is agreed to. The next bill under the calendar for the day is Senate File 2114. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2114, number 20 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to child support judgments.
Calling the member from Dakota, Representative Holberg, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And this is a Minnesota State Bar Association bill. It attempts to rectify a policy that has been obviously not able to be implemented because it's unworkable. In 2010, the DHS bill implemented a change whereby child support judgments, you could place a lien on property for 20 years. The problem is that there's no other lien in the state of Minnesota that has that length of time, and so an individual checking for liens on property would look at it and assume that it's a 10-year lien, not knowing the nature of the lien itself, and they've tried to come up with some kind of solution, haven't been able to. Now, child support liens can be renewed, and so that would be the avenue. If the 10-year period was about to expire, an individual could renew the lien for an additional 10-year period of time, but it's unworkable the way real estate records are reviewed to have just this one type of lien allowed to be a 20-year duration when everything else is 10 years in duration.
Discussion to the bill. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2114.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Holberg. I want to appreciate your work on this bill. I know it wasn't altogether that difficult, but anytime you start getting into child support or the word in there, it starts to people get a little worried. And you did a nice job on this bill, and I'm glad to vote green with you on this bill.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar today is Senate File 1620. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1620, number 22 on the calendar for today, an act relating to eminent domain.
Call on the member from Hennepin, Representative Dittrich, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 1620 corrects what I perceive to be a loophole in the eminent domain reform of 2006. Current law is supposed to require government entities to provide small businesses and persons displaced by government projects with a state of Minnesota administrative law judge for appeal hearings when they are displaced and they have disputes over relocation benefits that are currently awarded. My constituent has experienced this not always to be the case. He has found that certain government entities, not all of them, have denied his clients the eligibility for relocation benefits. And so what Senate File 1620 basically does is it requires the government entities to provide persons that are displaced by government projects and want to appeal the award with a state of Minnesota administrative law judge. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will stand for questions.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1620.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 127 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. Its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is Senate File 1875. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1875, number 29 on the calendar for today, the second engrossment, an act relating to insurance.
I call on the member from Isanti, Representative Daudt, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 1875 is a bill that will allow insurance companies to provide a little better service to their customers. It's got 3 sections. Section number 1 would allow the insurers to provide a required property and casualty guarantee association notice with the delivery of the policy rather than at the time of sale. And this is in the event that they sell a policy over the phone. Apparently this disclosure is fairly lengthy, and this would allow them to just provide it with the delivery of the policy. Section number 2 allows insurers to provide insurance identification cards electronically as long as the customer consents to that. And then section number 3 allows insurers to obtain an accident report directly from the Department of Public Safety without getting a written authorization from the customer first. And apparently that's the practice right now, and we're the only state in the country that requires that written authorization from the customer before they can obtain that accident notification. So it's going to allow them to streamline their processes and get their cases settled quicker and get the settlements in the hands of the customers in a more timely fashion. So Department of Public Safety is on board, and I would encourage a green vote. Thank you.
Discussion. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1875.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Wardlow votes aye. There being 119 ayes and 9 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1599. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1599, number 31 on the calendar for today, an act relating to Veterans Affairs.
Call on the member from Washington, Representative Kriesel, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Senate File 1599 is a bill that would permit any private employer to grant preference in hiring and promotion to a veteran, the spouse of a disabled veteran who has a service-connected permanent and total disability, or the surviving spouse of a deceased veteran. The key aspect of this bill does not mandate it for private businesses. It just allows them not to be sued if they grant this preference. I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the Chief Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1599.
Third reading. Representative Coonan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is a good bill. It would do a lot of good for our veterans and spouses of disabled veterans and spouses of deceased veterans. The bill is completely voluntary for private employers, and it does not violate any state human rights laws or state equal employment law. It's a good bill. Give it a green vote.
Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Hausman.
Right after this started moving through the process, I was approached out in the hallways by other veterans who were concerned. Have you heard from other veterans about the fact that if in this case we would grant preference to those who have a service-connected permanent and total disability, and there are those veterans who already worry that they come back and are unable to find a job and wondered, does this put one group at a disadvantage over against another?
The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I have not heard. I have not heard that concern. It's a good bill that gives preference to people that have sacrificed a great deal for our country.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Dean votes aye. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. Its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is Senate File 2060. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2060, number 24 on the calendar for today, an act relating to legislative enactments.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate File 2060 is the annual Revisor's bill, which corrects technical errors made in past sessions of the legislature. Article 1 contains miscellaneous error corrections, typographical changes, and cross-references, deletes erroneous cross-references, and changes them. Article 2 involves the data practices chapter of statutes, chapter 13, and adds cross-references, or rather informational references to other areas of statute to let people know where other data practices provisions reside in Minnesota statutes. And Article 3 corrects references and statutes to the revised Minnesota Board of Social Work Practice Act in Chapter 148E, which replaced Chapter 148D effective August 1st, 2011. Stand for questions.
Discussion. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2060.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm the second author on this bill. Talked through it with Representative Wardlow and independently walked through it with the Revisor statutes. It's a good bill. Vote yes.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar today is Senate File 1492. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1492, number 26 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to state government.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate File 1492 changes Minnesota's Fallen Firefighters Memorial Day from the first Sunday in October to the last Sunday in September. And the reason for this change, members, there is a new Minnesota Fire Service Foundation Memorial that is scheduled to be dedicated on the Capitol Mall on I believe the first Sunday in October. And this would move the observation of Fallen Firefighter Memorial Day to a week prior. I'm sorry, the dedication is going to happen on the date that the bill indicates for the new observance. And this will allow family members of fallen firefighters to visit the dedication of the new memorial, and then 1 week later travel to Washington, D.C. if they so desire to observe National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Day with their families there. So please vote green for this important bill for our fallen firefighters' families.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, clerk give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1492.
Third reading. Member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as Representative Wardlow said, this is a non-controversial bill that's just to make it convenient for the firefighters, and I'd say vote green on this bill also.
Seeing no further discussion, the Chief Clerk will call the roll. Clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. Its title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar today is Senate File 2360. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2360, number 1 on the supplemental calendar for today, an act relating to health.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, this is a technical bill having to do with last year's omnibus bill. It has a very limited implementation of about 6 or 7 people who were accidentally caught by the legislation. This changes it to prospective rule changes. It is supported by the department. There was no opposition in committee, and I would ask for members' support.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2360.
Third reading, the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a small change, but it's an important one, and I would encourage members to support the bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar today is House File 2463. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2463, number 2 on the supplemental calendar, the first engrossment, an act relating to liquor.
Call the member from Morrison, Representative LeMieur, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2463 is a bill that allows licensed retailers, bars, restaurants the ability to purchase alcohol in the event the state is unable to issue their $20 buyer card. Appreciate a green vote.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2463.
Third reading, discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if Representative LeMieur will yield.
He will yield. Representative Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative LeMieur, when the shutdown happened in Minnesota, I don't know about you, but people in my district were pretty irritated and beyond inconvenienced. And I'm just a little bit surprised by this bill that of all the things that inconvenience people, that the one that we are acting on the floor today has to do with keeping liquor sales going. And I'm just wondering if you could explain why your bill doesn't include continued funding for child care or for some of the health care that was interfered with during the shutdown.
The member from Morrison, Representative LeMieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, this bill is the idea behind this bill was brought forth to me by many of my local establishments, and I kept it simple and kept it to this one issue.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think this bill, and I don't fault Representative LeMieur for it. I kind of fault the Speaker for picking it up off the rostrum and bringing it before the body today, but I think it shows really misplaced priorities. We shut down the state government because we couldn't get our work done for 20 days. Most people who serve in this body continue to get paid. Well, 20,000 state employees didn't get paid. We had families all over the state wondering whether their child care was going to continue, whether they could go to work, whether they'd have to quit a job or go to really extreme lengths to find child care for their children. And we're here today on the House floor talking about whether you can buy beer. I mean, honestly, Mr. Speaker, I think the priorities that this reflects shows that we're not focused on the things that Minnesotans really care about. And also, I think it shows a lack of understanding of exactly how significant the government shutdown was in the context of state history. It is, Mr. Speaker, without question, the biggest failure in Minnesota state government history that we shut down the government completely for 20 days. You could get a driver's license in Syria, Mr. Speaker, but you couldn't get a driver's license in Minnesota. Members, we were the laughingstock not just of the country, but the entire world. And what action are we taking to correct that wrong? We're getting ready for shutdown 2.0, and we're getting ready so that you can continue to buy beer. I think that's kind of an insult to all the families that went through hardship with a variety of other issues. And members, I would encourage a no vote on this bill.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, I suppose, Representative LeMieur, you're correct. The next shutdown will go down much easier for Minnesotans as long as they can have a beer to get through it. But members, this is really troubling. Representative Nornis in the Higher Ed Committee, we tried to bring an amendment to ensure that disabled college students would be able to continue to get their services. Disabled college students. And you know what happened to that amendment in higher ed? It was ruled out of order. We couldn't even debate whether those services could continue. So, Representative LeMieur, I have a problem here. I would love to have a cold beer with you and talk about this. I'm not anti-beer. I want to know why is the GOP being anti-disabilities who wouldn't even hear the amendment in the Higher Ed Committee. And it was about disabled college students. And in fact, not only wouldn't hear the amendment, but our friends on the other side of the aisle on the Higher Ed Committee, when we tried to raise the point of order, that point of order was ruled not germane. Wouldn't even let us vote on that. We couldn't vote on the germanest decision of the chair. So I'm troubled here. I hear about your local businesses. That's fine. And I even agree, Representative LeMieur, that there are some small instances where even I could agree. I agree, for example, about the minuscule tuitions. The college kids paid their tuition. The money's sitting in the bank. They should get that education during the summer session. But you're going to have a long way to go to get me to agree that disabled people's services can be cut, child services can be cut, a whole host of programs can be shut down, but make sure the beer keeps flowing. That's a misplaced priority.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative LeMieur, I rise in opposition to your bill. You know, I spent 2 weeks trying to keep a paper mill open in my district, and hundreds of people were laid off, lost their benefits, lost their livelihood because of a government shutdown, and now we're going to worry about a beer and a bump. And I just think that we need to make a commitment as this body to do our work and to do it on time and pass bills that get enacted into law and keep the government open. And this isn't the first bill we're going to see. We got one in transportation. We probably got one in every commitment because we're just going to get ready just in case we can't pass a budget bill so government operates without any consequences. The fact of the matter is, didn't get the job done, and there's consequences to it. And this is a bad bill. This is just to abdicate responsibility of this body and of the Senate to get our job done. We got elected to do a job, and the people in my district were not happy. If I was home during the shutdown, it's like, why are you here? Why aren't you in St. Paul getting the government open? Do your job. That's what I heard. So the question is, are we just going to go on automatic pilot and the consequences be darned? Or are we going to do our job? Vote no.
The member from Rice, Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I just want to weigh in on this because I don't know that you all know that residents in nursing homes aren't just the elderly. They aren't just our moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas. Oftentimes we care for traumatic brain injured folks as well. During the shutdown, some of those folks, the most expensive population to care for, the nursing homes had to eat the cost of residents who were on ventilators and who were tube fed and had dialysis treatments. So in my district, I do have a couple of nursing homes that did eat those costs. To this day, they don't have the money. They did not get any improvements to their other nursing homes and to their nursing home residents or any of the staff or any of the people that they serve. So I'm not going to stand up and vote to serve people beer when I can't get my residents in my nursing homes the care, the critical care that they deserve. Please vote no.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I ran for the first time in 2006 after a government shutdown. And while I wasn't a part of that, it was sure a part of the conversation that we had over the course of that campaign. And so this is my first government shutdown, this one that we just went through. And I sure heard it from the people that I represent. They didn't understand why on earth we couldn't get the central point of our work done, the budget balance. Why on earth could we not get that job done? Why did we let the government shut down? People I represent knew that it was expensive. They knew that we were cutting services off to people who depended on them. They knew that they were going to be laid off from their job at a time when they couldn't afford it. And they couldn't understand why we let the government shut down. This piece of legislation is just one of many that would let us off the hook if we don't get our job done. I can't believe we would stand up and say that. I can't believe that we would invite more gridlock into this body. It's our job to balance the budget, ours. And if we're not going to allow ourselves to feel the consequences or the pressure of what it means for a government shutdown, we're never going to get it done. It's going to roll forward and roll forward and roll forward like they do in Washington, D.C. I know this is just a little bill. I know this is just about beer sales, and that's important. But for crying out loud, the stuff that we do in the state government is important, and we should have a deadline. We should not shut down the government, and certainly if we do, there should be consequences from the citizens. Please vote no.
The member from Otter Tail, Representative Nornis.
Okay. I don't want to prolong this, but I did hear my name a couple times. I just wanted to, for the record, indicate that the amendment that in my committee was not allowed to be heard did not make the 24-hour rule, and we do have rules in my committee, and we follow them.
Seeing the member from Hennepin, Representative Khan.
Mr. Speaker and members, I'm actually going to take the opposite approach from that some people have said. I believe we should actually, I'm going to vote against this bill because I don't believe it goes far enough. I believe we should pass a lights-on bill, which I have put in several times over the past few legislative sessions. I have the state, anyone who thinks that government runs on autopilot with a lights-on bill is just doesn't quite understand the changes that usually need to be made and that people strongly want to make. The state of Wisconsin has a lights-on bill. When we had this shutdown in 2006, I believe, there are about 8 states that didn't come to a budget agreement, and Minnesota was the only state that shut down. The shutdown has a lot of costs besides the ones that people have listed. It also has the cost of state employees working less efficiently for probably the whole month before the shutdown as they're talking about it and wondering what they're going to do. Are they going to lose salary for a while? Are they going to have to change vacation plans that they may have made? And then they probably use the whole month after it comes back talking about how the shutdown affected them. So I didn't offer it as an amendment to this bill because I probably could understand a ruling that said it would greatly extend the direction of a fairly minor bill. But I urge people to vote no for either of 2 reasons, that we should have a complete lights-on bill, or that there are other things that are much more important than this issue to keep on.
The member from Winona, Representative Plowski.
Mr. Speaker and members, the amendment that was offered in higher education that did meet the deadline was mine. It would have included the disability community in the ban on shutdown. And for all of the reasons that have been stated today, I think we should not take shutdown as a piecemeal event, whether it's beer, whether it's higher ed. It should be done in totality. And when we take it as a piecemeal event, there is definitely less harm and less hurt. And we should also prioritize shutdown. If we prioritize beer, if we prioritize the MnSCU system, but we leave the disability community out of the discussion, there is a shame on us. There was shame on us when this occurred, and that shame still sticks. The chair ruled, as a chair can, that the amendment was not germane. I then asked to appeal the ruling of the chair, and I asked for a roll call vote. That was ruled out of order, and then about an hour discussion took place. So the amendment was mine. That's what happened, And I would hope today we would not take just one aspect of the shutdown, but we would look at the entire case of what happens when this state is shut down and not take it piecemeal.
Seeing no further discussion, the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, just for the record, there's only one person in the state of Minnesota that has the authority to shut down government, and that's the governor. You know it. So don't be so disingenuous to say it's our fault that we didn't do the job. We had a very tough assignment, especially for a lot of us new freshmen here, to balance a $5.2 billion deficit. So we had some hard things to do. Our side wanted to cut the spending, cut the wasteful spending, and your side wanted to raise taxes. So all he wanted to do was raise taxes. There was a fundamental difference. We believe that money in the pockets of our businessmen and businesswomen and families are better than the government spending it here. And guess what happened? Now we have a $1.2 billion surplus because of the hard work that was done. And a lot of it was done on your side too. Certainly. We'll give credit where credit's due. But it was a fight. We had to fight for it. Every step of the way. Spend, spend, spend. I tell you, people out in Wright County, they told me to come down here and get the government from growing too fast and quit spending money so wastefully. Every dollar that I've earned in my little private, small little business in Watertown, in Delano, from Watertown, so I get the two mixed up, I make sure that when you're down here that you spend it very wisely and not waste it. And I've witnessed in 2 years that there are some wasting of our tax dollars. Not one of you can say it's not. You know that to be true. There are some great reforms that were done. Because of it, because of the hard decisions that we made, there's a surplus. And now we're able to pay back the shift that some of you did years ago. And guess what? The governor says no, he's not going to do it. Keep it in the bank account to collect dust. That's ridiculous. And I'm not done, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry. I just want to finish up and I'll be done. Sometimes he can't see me here because I'm 5'7" and a half. That's just a little stretch. But let me make this point. And I forgot it, blasted, because I got a cold. Representative Teasen's looking at me, making me a little nervous. No, you're not. I'm just teasing. But, Representative Murphy, we were able to make some tough choices. And it wasn't easy. It was a little painful for all of us. I heard it too in Delano and Monticello and St. Michael and all over. Get back to work. What are you doing in Delano? But don't forget, we had a lights-on bill. We spent the last day of session saying, a lights-on bill. Governor, would you please sign this bill? You don't have to shut down government. And what did he do? Nothing. He didn't want to sign it. And not one person, not one disabled, not one elderly, not one folks that didn't get the service hurt. They got the service. They got the need. We funded the priorities. Now we have a surplus. So don't sit there and blame us that we didn't do the job when the governor had the opportunity to have a lights-on bill right there and then. Now, Representative LeMieur, this bill is not just about beer for you, Representative Morrow. It's about beer. I'd like to have a beer. Yeah, I'm going to have a cold beer too because my wife's out of town. But don't tell her. But what it is, it's about the private sector. And I don't know about how many of you, but I'm in the private sector. How many are in the private sector? Raise your hand. Well, when the government shuts down and it affects the private sector, it affects the pocketbooks of Minnesota families and businesses, and it affects the coffers of the state here in Minnesota. And we must not have our government, because we didn't do the job, or in this case I'll blame the governor because he's the only one of the Constitution that has the authority to shut down government, hinder the private sector. Let's pass this bill, move on to the business, go on to the next one. Vote yes. Let's do the right thing. Remember, $1.2 billion surplus. We did a good thing.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't inspired to speak until I heard the excellent words of Representative McDonald. So I would wonder if he would yield.
Yes, he will yield.
Yes.
Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, Representative McDonald, you said that only the governor has the constitutional authority to shut down government. I wondered if you could share what constitutional theory that is, and that I know it as well as you do, but I don't. So maybe you could share that theory that allows the governor of Minnesota to shut down state government unilaterally.
The member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, the governor has the only authority in the state of Minnesota to shut down government. That's it.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask another question if Representative McDonald would yield.
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Representative McDonald, can you tell us the last time there was a state government shutdown before 2011?
The member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, no, because I was back in my district working hard, paying my taxes, so you good folks down here can spend it wisely. So I don't know when the last government shutdown was.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative McDonald, it was in 2005, and I know I'm asking hard questions here, so I'll give you the answer without asking. So in 2005, we had a different governor. It was Governor Pawlenty. The state Senate was in the hands of the DFL, and the state House was in the hands of the Republican Party. And the only thing that is in common between 2005 and 2011 is that Republicans were in charge of the state House both times. This budget and the budget before were the years that the Republicans had control of the Minnesota House. The only common ground, the only thing that makes it 2 for 2 is that when you people get in charge of this institution, you like to shut down government. And your statement about and you know, I can understand it. I mean, if you have all these new Tea Party folks, you have this anti-government fury coming in, and I can understand that a government shutdown must be the greatest thing you can possibly imagine. And it doesn't sound that bad to you, except, of course, unless it affects beer. And Representative Woodard, I know you don't want it to affect racehorses. And I think there's some other bills of people who don't want the public to realize that Republicans like to shut down state parks. So we do some things like that to kind of cover your backside a little bit on some of these things that people might notice. But the fact is, you're 2 for 2. When Republicans take charge of the Minnesota House, they shut down government. It doesn't matter who the governor is. It doesn't matter who's in charge of the state Senate. Republicans in the state House like government shut down. And that's just the fact. So it's 2 for 2. Representative McDonald, I do have another question, though, and that, if you would yield.
He will yield. Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McDonald, I wonder if you could share with us what the budget deficit projected for the next biennium is.
The member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, Representative Winkler, I'd like to make a comment. I try to be a nice gentleman here down at the Capitol, to be a nice guy, to work hard and say good things and do what's best for my district. I don't appreciate your smart aleck remarks saying I hate to ask tough questions. I'm not a high school kid here. I have an education. You don't have to be patronizing me and say, well, I'm asking hard questions. I realize I'm asking hard questions. No, the questions you ask are not hard, Representative Winkler, because I wasn't aware that it was 2005 or 2004. You think that to say you're asking hard questions? I don't appreciate that kind of sarcasm. It's not appreciated. It's not becoming of a gentleman whatsoever. And I've heard you say it a couple times to Representative Franzen and some of my other colleagues. I realize I'm asking hard questions. No, that's not fair. It's not nice. Not at all. It's disrespectful. And it's not becoming of a gentleman. It's not becoming of this body. Now, let me ask you a question. What was your question, Representative Winkler? Because you are a nice guy. I do like you. But it was a tough question, and I forgot it.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler, could you restate your question for Representative McDonald?
Yes, the budget deficit. That's right. Yes, according
the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Sometimes sarcasm is just too hard to resist.
I understand. I'm an Irishman. I can take it.
The question is the budget.
If the gentleman wouldn't mind going through the chair, I'd appreciate it. Representative McDonald, you do have the floor, and I believe you understand the question. Representative Winkler asks you to yield to Representative McDonald.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, I believe I saw an email. My memory is correct. It was a $4.1 perhaps $billion deficit. I'm not sure. There were several numbers. If we don't spend that money, we won't have a deficit. Maybe if we do a little more work down here and cutting wasteful spending, we'll have another surplus.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Well, Mr. Speaker and Representative McDonald, I certainly didn't mean to be disrespectful, but you stated that only the governor has the constitutional authority to shut down government, and I asked you why that was, and your answer to me was only the governor has the constitutional authority to shut down government. So it's not very disrespectful to not answer a question that's asked of you either after you've agreed to do so. And you don't have to know the details of how much the deficit is in the next biennium, but if you stand up and kind of brag about a $2.2 billion surplus and how that's due to all this wonderful Republican, well, he said 2.2, this wonderful Republican restraint on spending and all these private sector things that come from Wright County that make everything better. You stand up and brag about that, but you don't want to talk about what is the reality, which is that you're leaving a huge deficit in the next biennium. You owe $2.4 billion to the kids in the school, and for the first time in state history ever, the state of Minnesota is borrowing money to pay the bills on our operating expenses. This is a disaster of a budget that you passed after shutting down state government. Now, I will grant you that the Minnesota House on its own doesn't have the authority to shut down state government. You had to work hard with the Senate to do that, and the governor, fortunately, was here to stand up for people who were actually needing some government services, and the courts were the ones who did it. Now, some representatives, like Representative Gruenhagen, said the courts didn't have the power to do that, but your constitutional idea that only the governor has responsibility doesn't really hold any water. The governor didn't have final decision-making power on whether to shut down state government. What the governor had a power to do was to ask the court to keep some vital services open and actually take the responsible approach to recognize that people in Minnesota depend on state government in a lot of ways that doesn't make them bad people. If you're disabled and you depend on some help from the taxpayers, it doesn't make you a bad person. If you're a little kid who needs some high-quality daycare or child care access, that doesn't make that kid a bad person because the taxpayers are paying for it. There are a lot of people who depend on state government for really good reasons. And when you shut down state government, you hurt them. Governor Dayton stood up and actually went to the courts and said, you got to fund some of these very important things. So don't say that it's the governor's fault that the state government shut down. Don't pat yourself on the back for having a surplus right now. You have a big deficit coming up. You borrowed money like it's never been borrowed before. Your budget is a disaster, and you delivered that disaster after shutting down state government for 20 days. And again, the only thing that is consistent between this shutdown and the last shutdown is that your party was in charge of the State House. Congratulations for that.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members, I think I had a simpler, because I'm not as I don't have as complex a mind as Representative Winkler, had a simpler answer to Representative McDonald, which is two things to read. One, a little more difficult, and I hope you have a copy in your desk, of the Constitution of the State of Minnesota, which means that a bill, something to become law, must be passed by both houses of the legislature and the governor. So the governor has very little unilateral power. Since we talked about, do you think I'm a high school student? I'm sorry I don't have it in my desk, but there's a really good pamphlet done for high school students on how a bill becomes a law. And I suggest that you go get that and read that. It has the same information as the Constitution, just in a more simple form.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, I always like when Representative McDonald stands up. He reminds me of his father, for a little history, you know. His dad's name was KJ. One day on the House floor, former Representative Trimble told him what KJ stands for, knee-jerk, remember? And you're following in Dad's footsteps over there, I got to admit, Representative McDonald. Although I have to say that at 5'3", you tower over me, but we kind of see eye to eye on a few issues. This isn't one of them. No, the history of this place, members, is, if you want to talk about shutting down government, you know, I remember when Governor Ventura got elected and the House was taken over by Speaker Swigum and Majority Leader Pawlenty. And we almost went to a shutdown, I think, the second year in 2000. And, of course, they blamed the Senate. It was Majority Leader Moe. Then Majority Leader Moe left, and then we almost shut down government again in 2001. I think it was Swigum and Pawlenty and the Republicans blamed Ventura, and then they blamed Majority Leader Hottinger. Remember? He was there. And then the following year, I think we almost did shut we went and we called a special section. We finished in one day. And that year, I think Majority Leader was Representative Dean Johnson. But the players were still the same on this side. Oh, yeah. Pawlenty and Swigum. And then we finally won back the House in 2007. We had a final a few fun years with Governor Pawlenty then. And we didn't shut down government, Representative McDonald. No, because most of us on this side, I think, in fact, I can speak for my entire caucus, believe that government still does good things for people. We didn't want to shut down programs for the handicapped. We didn't want to shut down programs for our most vulnerable adults. You know, I was going to actually vote. I love beer. I got to tell you that, Representative LeMieur, and I know it's important in Little Falls being, you know, beer is pretty important up there in your county, but there's a lot of things more important. So, Representative McDonald, your diatribe talked me actually out of voting for this bill, because it is time that Representative Pawlowski, he was right, that we take a bigger picture look at what we did. No, you know, we know how to compromise because we believe in government, and we did it for 4 years, Representative McDonald, even though we wanted to raise taxes on the richest folks, because, you know, your philosophy that cutting taxes for the wealthiest Minnesotans and Americans is going to create jobs in this country just has not been proven over the last decade or better. And so, you know, it's the legislature, Representative McDonald, that raises taxes and spends taxes and sends a budget to a governor, and compromise has to take place. And you've been unwilling to do that for 2 years. I suggest, as we approach the next election, you learn a little bit more about compromise, because I think you're going to learn it in the ballot box this year.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hesitantly ask if the member from Wright, Representative McDonald, will yield for a question.
He will yield, Representative Dapp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McDonald, Minnesota is 154 years old. I believe its 155th anniversary of statehood comes up later next month. As you and I both know, the Constitution requires a balanced budget. Can you name for us the 1 year in the 154-year history of the state of Minnesota that balanced budget requirement was dodged by borrowing and deficit spending rather than forwarding a balanced budget to the governor for his signature?
Member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, since you hesitantly asked me a question, I will hesitantly answer it. I'm going to take a guess of the year 2011.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and Representative McDonald, you're right. So the budget that you sent last year and that the governor signed, $2.2 billion in borrowing from schools, over $750 million. It's going to be over $1 billion by the time those kids pay it back. That, you claim, is a responsible way to run the state government and to do our budget. Mr. Speaker?
Representative Dabney?
Will the representative from Wright County yield again?
He will yield, Representative Dabney.
Thank you. Representative McDonald, do you know how many states in the nation executed a shift in their school funding to balance their budget, and what percentage those other states shifted their spending? This is fair. It's been mentioned on the floor, and you were warned it would be on the test.
The member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, to my knowledge, I guess it was your side that proposed the shift to 70-30. Our side was a 90-10. So your proposal and what the Democrats did when they had the majority was a bigger shift in the school shift, which was even more unfair for our school kids. Now, if you want to ask the question about who did it and what state, I suppose maybe Minnesota was the only state. But guess who's paying the school system back today? The Republican Party, and unfortunately our good governor, the state of Minnesota, vetoed it. We have over $400 million we want to pay back to the schools. And he says no, we should keep it into the rainy fund or tax the rich. Again, it's a fundamental difference. We believe that money is best in the pockets of the businessmen and women and the families, and they can do with it what they please in the communities. They can donate it more to their churches, to their civic groups, and into the community. You put $1 into government and only half of it, we're lucky if half of it gets back to where it's needed. So it's, again, a fundamental shift in difference in opinion. It's not always about taxing the rich. We spend enough money here. So I would propose perhaps you talk to our governor that maybe he decides to encourage the payback of the school shift.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, Representative McDonald, as often, you're wrong. The only other state in the nation to shift their education funding was that paragon of budgeting virtue, California. And they only did it to 19% of their funding. It was your side that insisted on a 40% shift in school funding. It started, you're right, when Governor Pawlowski insisted on a 70-30 shift, and your your members then went to 60-40 in ending last year's shutdown. I'm wondering if the member would yield one more time for a question.
He will not. Representative Dabney.
All right, then I'll ask the question as a politician gets to and answer it. It's one of the prerogatives of the office. The question was going to be, in that 154-year history, name the one year that the state budget was discussed and debated behind closed doors in a dark and locked Capitol where the public wasn't allowed in, where the media wasn't allowed to report, and where people didn't get to find out about what their legislators were doing until after the votes. That was 2011, Representative McDonald. That was your party's leadership in both houses that decided that Minnesota didn't get to know what their legislators were doing. And given what you did, I can hardly blame you for hiding. The budget was balanced irresponsibly. The budget was balanced dishonestly when members get up and say that the Republicans wanted to cut and the Democrats only wanted to raise taxes. That's a lie, and the members on the other side know it, and the public knows it as well. They sent us here to work together. They sent us here to lead. They sent us here to debate and discuss and compromise, which is where your leadership failed. We shouldn't be picking beer over kids. We shouldn't be picking beer over jobs on construction sites. We shouldn't be picking beer over state parks. We shouldn't be picking ideological extreme positions over doing our job for the citizens of Minnesota. Vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, members, some of what I was planning to say has been touched on already, but I want to clarify a couple of points. When we hear rhetoric, and it's just that rhetoric that somehow a surplus was created, I think there has to be a bit of a dose of reality here. We still owe the schools, according to the February forecast, $2.4 billion. The forecast also shows a shortfall of $1.3 billion. And the main point I wanted to make here this afternoon was a point that I made in Ways and Means this morning. You have added $200 million to the shortfall next biennium by shifting various costs into the next biennium. So now you've brought the shortfall at the beginning of the next biennium to $3.9 billion before you even engage in any discussion about costs. The other thing I'd like to point out, and Representative Dabney touched on this, he missed one important point. Some of us were invited to the Capitol to participate, Representative Dabney, in the discussions to reopen state government, and we were told we were not welcome. So some of us sat in the governor's retiring room while the discussions went on because we were just not allowed into those meetings, nor was even the DFL staff allowed into those meetings. They did have a caveat, and by the way, that order, if you will, did not come from the Speaker of the House. It came from the Majority Leader at the time of the State Senate. And there was one way we could have sat in. We had to sign off in advance that we would support whatever those outcomes were. In other words, we were buying a pig in a poke. We had no idea what the outcomes were, so you had to kind of sign off up front. And so that was creating an almost impossible situation. But when you talk about the Capitol being dark and the lack of participation on the part of the public and or the minority party in the Minnesota House. But the main reason I got up was to point out you're still adding to the deficit as we go through this legislative process. April the 5th, the last tracking sheet showed $200 million. This morning you added more to that $200 million in the Ways and Means Committee. So this whole idea of deficit funding government continues to be the hallmark of the Republican majority in this body.
The member from Cass, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully I won't agitate anyone and make this get any worse, because I think enough of us have pointed fingers at everybody else. But I just thought I'd bring up a couple highlights. In 2006, when the Democrats took over, they had a $2 billion surplus. When they left in 2010, they had a $4.1 billion deficit. But I'm not going to blame you for that. I think it's all our faults. But it needs to be mentioned. I think it was 2009 when Majority Leader Surdich offered a lights-on bill. It didn't pass, but he offered it. He thought it was something important to do. What we're offering here, I believe, is just to be able to buy beer. It's not the end of the world. It's a pretty simple bill. A lot of folks like beer, you know. It's not a problem. But this idea that we lied last session and we met in the dark and the public wasn't allowed, well, unfortunately, the circumstances were the public wasn't allowed in the building because it was shut down. Now, the administration could have opened the building. They had the security here. The building could have been opened. But I want to point out one thing. The committees that met and did the final bills, for the most part, were just Republicans, because every Democrat, except a few, said, we're not going to vote for any of the bills that you put forward with the governor during the special session, except one committee, committee I was on, because the lead, Representative Hausman, in the Senate, Senator Langseth, they said they were going to vote for the bill. They'd love to work on the bill. So they did. We did, with the governor's staff. It was open. It was bipartisan. We got it done because they didn't say, we're going to take our toys and go home. We're not going to vote for the bill. So if we could move on with this small bill that we're obviously making into a great deal of discussion and do the people's work and continue on, and Representative Winkler, maybe do it in a friendlier way. I know you got it in you. You're an attorney, I know, but I know you can do it with a soft voice and a smile. So let's try real hard, and I'll try real hard, and let's move on. I think the Speaker would like to get out of here.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen. Oh, I'm sorry, the member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, a little more history for my friend across the aisle just now, Representative Hawes. You know, in 2006, if we didn't take inflation into account, there was a $2 billion surplus. But, Representative Hawes, I won't ask you to yield because you know the answer to who changed our rules and to Enron accounting practices, as I call them. No, Roger Moe and Pawlenty, when they were running against each other for governor, yes. And we tried to change it in 07 and we never got it done. Because you can talk about having a balanced budget and a $2 billion surplus, but I think the Department Office of Management and Budget, whatever it was called before we changed that name in 2007, told us that in reality we had a $1.3 billion deficit if we counted inflation on the spending side. You know, you can't change accounting rules. We're the only state in the nation that counts inflation on the revenue side, but not on the spending side. We haven't had a surplus for over a decade because the games that have been played here and the starving and starving and starving of the beast, which a lot of your new members like. They like that, and that's fine. But, you know, members, they didn't care if they shut down government. They don't like government. That's why they shut it down in the first place. So, you know, I don't know what the argument here is. Everybody seems to twist history to their advantage, but those are the facts. And Representative House, you know I've got the facts right here in my pocket.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, this was a valuable discussion on the budget and how we got here, but I want to return us to what this bill is actually about, and that is it's a shutdown 2.0 bill. And that, I think, should concern Minnesotans greatly, you know, especially in light of Representative Dean's comments just about 2 weeks ago, where he, talking about the shutdown, he said, we won, the Republicans won, and Dayton lost. That's not how we should be thinking about the shutdown. It's not about the winners or losers in our state shutdown. The fact is there were lots of losers when our state shut down. The people of Minnesota lost. 19,000 Minnesotans were laid off when you shut down the state government. Small businesses weren't able to get permits when you shut down the state government. Our parks were closed to weddings. Our parks were closed and weddings were canceled, all as a result of the state government shutdown. Representative Dean, that is not about you winning and Governor Dayton losing. It's about the people of Minnesota losing. The fact that you consider the failure to do the job here in the legislature a win should scare all of us about what you plan to do next year, and that's why this bill should scare all of us. If this bill is any indication, it's setting us up, if you do return to the majority, for a plan to shut down the state government once again, but avoid a little bit of the consequences. Not the big consequences that folks on this floor have talked about. People with disabilities not being able to get their services that they need. Child care parents not being able to get payments for their child care. Those are the serious consequences that are going to result from that next shutdown. People may not be able to get the beer, and not even not get the beer. It's just folks that haven't renewed their licenses may not be able to deliver that beer. This is a bill that picks and chooses services that you want to put on autopilot spending, making it easier at the end of the day to ignore our responsibility to do the job we should have done last year and to do the job that we should do in the future. You know, Governor Plenty, former Governor Plenty, back in 2005, when people were talking about lights on bills and a variety of things, and in 2009 as well, said that those bills just institutionalized gridlock. I guess that this is a circumstance where Representative LeMieur is taking one small step in the direction of just trying to institutionalize gridlock. Minnesotans disagree with that. When we shut down the state of Minnesota, we all lose. It's not about one side winning and the other side losing. It's about all of us losing. And we should vote no on this bill and stop trying to prepare for the next shutdown, but instead think about how we're actually going to get our work done in the future.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Morrow yield a question?
He will, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Morrow, you had brought up earlier your desire to bring forward amendments on this bill in committee, in the Higher Ed Committee. And I looked up at the board, at the little TV screen above the door over there, and it said final passage. And I was just wondering why you didn't bring your amendments to the floor today. I would certainly think that if there was a germaneness argument to make in committee, you could certainly do so here on the floor. It's every member's right to bring any amendment forward and debate that. And I'm just wondering and a little bit curious as to why you and other members have brought this forward after final passage and not before, if you were so interested in making your arguments about shutdown and trying to expand that to other areas of priorities that may be important to you, why you felt that it was so very important and necessary in committee and that you were so very victimized in that process. But yet today, here we are on the House floor with revisors at the ready to push a print button and distribute those amendments to the rest of us, that I, who don't sit on that committee, was denied the ability to look at your amendments and think about whether maybe it was a good idea. Could you tell us, inform the body as to why you were so eager and willing at that point, but yet more willing to argue maybe the higher points now and maybe more of the political points and less of the policy issues?
The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Dean. Sure, I'd be happy to do that, because there's a few points to be made here. Number one, to be clear, and maybe you weren't on the floor when Representative Pawlowski was speaking, it wasn't my amendment, it was Representative Pawlowski's amendment, but you might have missed that part. Number two, it was about amending a higher ed bill, and I don't think Representative LeMieur is bringing a higher ed bill. We were talking about disabled persons, and then we were talking about disabled college students. So I don't think that this bill is talking about college students. So to me, the germaneness issue is not the same. But to members, there's a greater question here. The greater question here is where are the priorities? And the priority I'm seeing here today is we need to make sure we protect the sale of beer. And what I'm asking is, why don't we have the discussion about all the other things, all the other needs? So we tried to raise disabled college students in the Higher Ed Committee because I believe, and I still believe, that was germane. And yes, I continue to be deeply bothered, and I think our own journal of this body shows how deeply bothered I and others are that we couldn't talk about disabled college students in the Higher Ed Committee, that we were ruled out of order. I'm deeply concerned about that. And I think that actually there are members on both sides of the aisle who believe that services for the disabled are tremendously important. There are members in this body who mentioned other services. other support for people who are homeless, for child care, for private college students, for public college students, for the environment, for the outdoors, for agriculture. We could go on and on. So my question would be back to you all, why didn't you? You're in the majority. Why are you bringing forward a bill to make sure that the beer keeps flowing in the next shutdown, but you didn't bring a bill in the majority to make sure that all these other services were continued as well?
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Morrow. I think that there has been a lot of political arguments from your side of the aisle and some history lessons from Representative Rukavina and others that are always quite informative about one side versus the other. And I think that that's probably what, if people are watching at home, and I'm sure that they are, probably a few of them at least, what frustrates them most about government is the inability to move forward and the very readily available opportunity to point fingers at the other side and to say this year, last year, the rearview mirror. And that's really what's frustrating about what we do here to people at home. But last year was something that was even more frustrated during a government shutdown that was unnecessary, that was totally avoidable. We did win because the state of Minnesota won when government finally said, I hear you. That's when Minnesota won. During the government shutdown, the government shut down the state of Minnesota. People they noticed. They took attention. They said, all right, now I'm paying attention. Why did they say I'm paying attention? What does shutting down the government have to do with buying beer? What does shutting down the government have to do with whether or not I might want to go to Canterbury and bet on a horse that I'm paying for? It's the government getting in the way of people trying to do their everyday jobs because we were punishing the governor. The government was punishing the people. Said, hey, you're not paying enough taxes. I want to raise taxes on you. I'm going to make it very uncomfortable for you in your private life. I'm going to make it so uncomfortable that you're going to call the people and tell them to raise taxes. So focused was the minority on raising taxes, and the governor on raising taxes wanted to make that absolutely as painful as possible to the average mom, the average dad just trying to go about their business, live their summer last summer. And that made it very difficult for the average person. That's what made people mad. That's what ended the shutdown, Representative Thiessen. That's what made Minnesota win, is the average guy paid attention. He stood up and he said, you know what, this isn't making any sense. The governor, to his credit, listened to them. And that's when Minnesota won. It's when government grows too big, takes too much, sticks its nose where it doesn't belong. That's when people really start paying attention. They paid attention last summer. I hope they're paying attention now.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there, Representative Dean goes again, claiming the Republicans won because they took the state to shutdown. That's what he just said. You heard it here on the House floor. Thank you, Representative Dean. I think that's exactly what this is about. But I would ask Representative LeMieur, the author of the bill, to yield.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
And this is partly in reference to what Representative Howes was saying about, whether people knew what was in the bills and stuff. Representative LeMieur, did you understand that you were going to be raising property taxes on almost 95% of your constituents by repealing the homestead credit last year when you voted for that 7 times in committee and on the House floor?
The member from Morrison, Representative LeMieur.
Again, the numbers that we receive from revenue, the description that we receive from revenue on whether it's tax credit or tax exclusion, the numbers ended up almost equal.
Well, Representative LeMieur,
the member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Apologize, Mr. Speaker. Representative LeMieur, that's just not true. The fact of the matter is, their local levies went up about 1% last year. Property tax across the state went up about a little over 4%. That's entirely due to the repeal of the homestead credit. So to hear folks on the other side saying that you didn't raise taxes on the people of Minnesota, that you made it through that you made it through this session without raising taxes on the people of Minnesota, that's simply not true. you raise taxes on 95% of the people in Minnesota. And in greater Minnesota, you raise taxes on homeowners 8 times as much as they did in the metro area as a result of the repeal of the homestead credit. You were not representing your constituents well when you did that, especially the folks in greater Minnesota. And that's just one example. And the reason I bring it up with Representative LeMieur, and I think Representative Erickson said this as well in the paper, is that they didn't understand what they were doing when they voted, and they actually wish the Democrats would have been there to explain the harm that they were going to impose on the people of Minnesota. That's a problem when we have huge tax implications, huge property tax increases going on in your districts, and you didn't even know what you were doing. You didn't even understand what you were doing. So to stand up on the other side of the aisle and say that you didn't raise taxes on the people of Minnesota, that it was a great budget, that you solved the problems of this state when you borrowed $640 million, the first time in our state history that we did a federal Washington, D.C. style deficit spending that's going to cost us $1.1 billion. You know, the fact of the matter is we're talking about this bonding bill that's coming up, $775 million that the governor is proposing in bonding. The interest on that $775 million bill is less than the interest you imposed on the people of Minnesota last year when you did Washington-style deficit credit card spending for the first time in the state's history. So I am a little, and I didn't want to stand up on this bill, and I backed off and talked about the fact that you're preparing for the next shutdown when I stood up the last time. But to have folks on the other side standing up and making some kind of claim that this was a win for the people of Minnesota, that you took the state to shutdown, to hear the majority leader of the Minnesota House standing up and saying, we won last year when we took the state to shutdown, when you passed a budget that borrows $640 million is going to cost us over $1 billion to pay that back. When you raised property taxes, every single one of you that voted for that bill on your constituents and in greater Minnesota, again, 8 times more than in the metro area, that is not a win for the state of Minnesota, members. We should have done this in a balanced way. We should have done this in a way that actually spread the risk. And that's not even to talk about the cuts you made to health and human services. The cuts you made in all kinds, into higher education, the biggest cut in the history of the state of Minnesota, going back to 1999 funding levels. That's a win for the state of Minnesota when you take the state to shutdown and you're left and you leave the state with that. I have to disagree with you, Representative Dean. That was not a win for you. That was not a win for us. That was not a win for anybody. And we shouldn't be passing this bill that's just setting us up for the next state shutdown when we come back here next year. When we come back here next year, we should do our job right. We should actually balance the budget in a balanced way. We shouldn't be increasing property taxes on people all across the state. We shouldn't be cutting higher education to shreds, Representative Norris. We shouldn't be doing any of those things. What we should be doing is balancing our budget in a balanced way. It's what the people of Minnesota want us to do, to act responsibly, not to run up the debt, and I would encourage you to vote no on this bill.
Discussion of the bill. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 63 nays, the bill is not adopted. The next bill on the calendar today is Senate File 2183. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2183, number 9 on the supplemental calendar for today, an act relating to education.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Doepke, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill regarding to education, and it's about clarification of the rulemaking process and the role of the Department of Education in that process, which is already in statute. Senate File 2183, House File 2596 amends Minnesota Statutes 2010, Section 127A, as entitled Administrative Rules by adding a section. It reinstates, and essentially this bill reinstates language in the law governing the rules by the Education Commissioner. It also reinforces Minnesota statutes in Chapter 14, which outlines procedures for state agencies must follow when they adopt administrative rules by adding the following language. It prohibits the Commissioner from enforcing pronouncements to school districts that meet the definition of a rule but have not been adopted as rules. Number 2, it requires the Commissioner to notify districts when introducing or issuing such pronouncements that the pronouncements are not enforceable. And number 3, it allows school districts to petition the Office of the Administration Hearings seeking an order for an administrative law judge determining that the Commissioner is enforcing or attempting to enforce a pronouncement as though it were an adopted rule. Members, this is really a good government bill. We already have in statutes a rulemaking process, and we have had concerns by members of the education community, including the Minnesota Association of Special Education, the Minnesota Association of Superintendents, and the Seeking Education and Equity, as well as the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. We have an agency that is filled with new people, and they have been making rules and has been causing chaos in some of our school districts, especially in the education area. And I think that it's time that we recognize all of our government agencies that there is a rulemaking process and that it should be obeyed, and that the legislature is the one that oversees this area. I have a handout that has been distributed on the rulemaking process. It was authored by Mark Shepard, who's a nonpartisan House Research and Legal Counsel for the Government Operations. This bill is not about punishing the Department of Education or the Commissioner of Education, but it's about better transparency of current law and raising the awareness of a good government procedure we already have in statute.
Discussion. The member from Ramsey, Representative Greiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I am a co-author of this bill. I also urge a green vote. This is a bill that's time has come. It's been authored by Democrats, and now it's being chief authored by a Republican. But it's long been a department problem in the agencies where there's been confusion out in the real world about what is enforceable, what is a rule that has the force and effect of law, and what is just a guideline. And usually people in the real world, including school districts, just have decided to interpret everything they get as enforceable by law because they can't tell the difference. This will help them. I think it will make government more flexible, more workable, and it could even save money if things that aren't really real laws don't have to be followed. The guidelines can be very helpful that the departments promulgate, but they just should be examples of how the law could work and not rigid laws, because those belong here in the legislature. So I urge a yes vote.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2183.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed as title is agreed to. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File 2294. Abler, Gottwalt, Kiffmeyer, Schumacher, and Huntley. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File 2949. Garofalo, Anderson P., Erickson, Loon, and Dittrich. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announced the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 2296. Sanders, Daudt, and Simon. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 2493. Erdahl, McNamara, and Lilly.
The next bill on the calendar for today is Senate File 288. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 288, number 6 on the calendar for today, unofficially engrossed and reprinted for the House to include committee amendments, an act relating to health.
Calling the member from Goodhue, Representative Kelly, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I think there's relatively few times that a group or an organization comes to us and actually asks us to enact legislation to require them to be registered with the state. That's exactly what this bill does. The Dental Lab Association has asked us to create this legislation so that all the dental labs in the state be registered with the state. They believe this is an extreme safety issue. The dental labs are charged with creating products, bridges, dentures, crowns, things like that actually go into people's mouths. They believe it's very important that we have them be registered because as more and more products enter the United States through overseas entities, they feel that it's extremely important that this be done. So this has actually been worked on over the last couple years so that the Dental Association and the dental labs have worked together to create this legislation, and I would ask for your support. Thank you.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and members, this bill was a little bit controversial at the start, and I talked to a lot of dentists that didn't like the way it was originally drafted, but it's all been worked out, and both the dental labs and the dental associations support the way the bill has been completed. So I urge you to vote green.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 288.
Third reading, the member from Anoka, Representative Abler.
And just so people know, also the social worker licensure bill is in here. It was controversial at one time. It's absolutely vanilla. And everybody I know hopes it passes. So your green vote is both good for dental labs, dentists, and social workers. So please vote green.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 120 ayes and 10 nays, the bill is passed as title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar today is House File 2614. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2614, number 8 on the calendar for today, an act relating to state government.
Calling the member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it came to the attention of the administrative law judges that they had as age 70 mandatory retirement age. A couple of their employees appealed to the Office of Equal Opportunity Employment. The office sided with the employees and told the administrative law judges that they had to get rid of that mandatory 70-year-old retirement age. Administrative law judges sat down with the Attorney General Attorney General agreed that they would probably lose the case. The only way they can do that is change that law, and that has resulted in House File 2614. What this does is allows administrative law judges to work past age 70. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Discussion. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2614.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is Senate File 1689. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1689 on the calendar for today, the third engrossment, an act relating to Veterans Affairs.
Call a member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is Senate File 1689. It came back from the Senate with a few additional provisions from the House bill, which was the reemployment bill for veterans, which passed the floor, with the House floor, I think, unanimously. This bill, the Senate file, added a few provisions. It passed the Senate 65-0. The provisions were, it gave non-disabled veterans on their examination, competitive examination, it raises their additional points from 5 to 10 points if they pass the test. For disabled veterans, it increases the additional points if they pass the test from 10 to 15 points. There's also a provision in there that passed the House 125-0 last year. It was House File 56, Representative Dill's bill. It has to do with reemployment rights for veterans here in the state of Minnesota. It complies with federal law. In addition to that, then, is the regular provision of the bill, which if you are called up for an emergency and you're a member of a National Guard outside the state of Minnesota, you cannot lose your job if after you do your service on the emergency up there. With that, members, I urge a green vote. Thank you.
There is an author's amendment at the desk. All right, discussion of the bill. Seeing no other amendments at the desk, clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1689.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 129 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. The next bill on the calendar today is House File 2627. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2627, number 11 on the supplemental calendar, the first engrossment, an act relating to human services.
Call the member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, House File 2627 is the omnibus policy bill for this session. Members, it includes a number of provisions, both Republican and Democrat. This would be considered a non-controversial bill. I hope most will agree with that. And I'll walk us through a few of the provisions. We have Representative Scalzi's bill in Article 1, requirements for electronic prescribing, basically allowing some smaller clinics some additional time to comply with electronic prescribing requirements. There was no controversy over that. The electronic claims and eligibility transactions required section of the bill is the new, it was kind of the base of the bill originally. This too is peace in the valley and a good reform moving forward. UCARE requested section 3 of Article 1 specifically so that instead of waiting until somebody drops out of eligibility, then finding out they've dropped out of eligibility, and then going back to try to get them connected once again, we would have a more seamless process that would allow UCARE and others to approach these members before their eligibility lapses and keep them in the program. A streamlined process that's good for the enrollees and also good for the state of Minnesota. In Article 2, we had former Representative Jeff Hayden, now Senator Jeff Hayden. I realize he was demoted, but we have kept his provision in here on contracting for performance. This allows a local agency to negotiate a supplemental agreement to contract with a vendor of residential services to include performance as part of that contract. The next items, Section 2 through 6, were offered by the counties. And there is peace in the valley on all these provisions. Representative Hoppe has his reciprocal agreement on child support enforcement with Bermuda. And I didn't wear my Bermuda shorts here. I know Representative Hoppe is anxious to answer any questions you've got about that major section of this bill. Article 3, disability services. All of the provisions here, members, were proposed by the long-term care imperative. Again, no controversy on any of these measures. We've had indications from the governor's staff that this is something that they're willing to support. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll stand for questions.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Gottwald moving to amend House File 2627, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A3.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chairman Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the A3 amendment is a technical change that reinserts some language that was originally stricken. We were advised by the county people as well as the state that this language needed to be put back in, so this amendment accomplishes that. I would encourage support from the members.
Discussion to the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed? The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.
Gottwald moving to amend House File 2627, the first engrossment as amended as follows. The amendment is coded 935.
Gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, a group of people brought this to us just recently. I'm going to apologize for the short notice, but amendments are often brought on short notice. This one, however, has been agreed to by the Department of Health, the health plans, the pharmacy benefit managers, the Pharmacy Association, all of the parties basically involved in this section of the bill. The desire here was that we would be more specific about the reference to the organization and standards so that those standards in fact can be administered by the Department of Health. This would fall under the category of a technical amendment, and there is peace in the valley. I would encourage support.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.
Champion moving to amend House File 2627, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 841.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's also peace in the valley on this, and this is going to be a friendly amendment. It simply is about a pool that's in North Minneapolis and the treatment that it's going to receive. The Minnesota Department of Health approves this language, and we would ask for this to be included in this bill.
Discussion. The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Representative Champion and I have discussed this, and I'm more than happy to encourage support for this amendment to the bill.
Discussion to the Champion amendment. All in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The amendment is adopted. Seeing no amendments to the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2627 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I was standing before you called for third reading. I would respectfully ask that you go back.
Are you making a motion to reconsider third reading?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider third reading.
Discussion? The gentleman from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the maker of the motion would yield for a question.
She will yield, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Y.
The lady from Hennepin.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Biskins, I stood because I wanted to discuss Article 3, which was described as being non-controversial, and it is, and it doesn't reflect changes that were made in the Health and Human Services Finance Committee, which were passed by this body and are now in a different conference committee.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative, we can have that discussion without reconsidering third reading. I guess I want to know why there needs to be a reconsideration of third reading, unless, of course, you have an amendment forthcoming. If you have an amendment forthcoming, I'd ask why it wasn't at the desk prior to the bill coming forward. The bill's been on the calendar for quite some time. I think the amendment could have been at the desk if you had an amendment forthcoming. Otherwise, I don't understand why we would need to reconsider third reading just to have a discussion. We can have the discussion now.
Discussion on the motion to reconsider. The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwald.
Well, Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Loeffler, I understand you have some concerns about Article 3 in the bill. However, as Representative Biskins pointed out, if you don't have an amendment to change it, I don't see why we can't debate your concerns about that after third reading. So, members, I would encourage not reconsidering.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill is not listed on the list that was given to us as a bill that would be considered today. I would have had an amendment ready, and I was going to propose an oral amendment to delete Article 3 so that the currently adopted House position that is currently in conference committee under Chair Abler, the conference committee that's going to deal with it has just been named, could deal with this particular issue. And I thought that was a respectful way to deal with it. Chair Gottwald is on that conference committee along with Chair Abler, and I felt like that was a more appropriate way to deal with it, to just take it off of this particular bill and let it be resolved in the other bill.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just want to note, I don't know about, in particular about Representative Loeffler's proposed amendment, but I just want to note for the Speaker that I was also standing before third reading was announced. And I didn't have an amendment, but I was indeed wanted to speak before third reading. So I just want to make that clear. I think the Speaker missed 2 standing members.
Discussion. On the motion to reconsider, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. Motion does not prevail. Discussion to the bill.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Dabney, for what purpose do you rise?
Division, Mr. Speaker.
There will be a division. Those in favor of the motion to reconsider, please stand. Al, do you have the number? Just on this side. Davis there. Please be seated. Those opposed to the motion to reconsider, please stand. There being 57 ayes and 64 nays, the motion to reconsider is not adopted. Discussion to the bill as amended. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I'm very disappointed in that. You know, it's sort of been the practice in this body that when the Speaker makes a mistake, which does happen, if any of you have been in the chair, it's really very easy to overlook a member who's standing. And usually when there's a mistake made, people just say, okay, let's go back. It's kind of a an accommodation is made, and it's really disappointing to have members say that they're not going to do that to accommodate a member who in good faith was standing and two members were standing. But that being said, I will now go on to what I was going to ask, and I was standing before third reading was announced, and I simply wanted to ask Representative Gottwald to yield, if he will yield, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The lady from Olmsted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwald, you didn't really talk much about the portion of the bill that has to do with the family stabilization program, and I do know that Department of Human Services is okay with the changes you've made, but I specifically wanted to ask you, I note on page 5 that you have stricken the portion of the bill that talks about the goals of the family stabilization program, and I'm just wondering why you chose to strike that. It seems to me that, you know, I know in general we don't put into law sort of goal statements, but this was in law, and it says these, among other things, these services promote and support families to achieve the greatest possible degree of self-sufficiency. So if you would answer that, and specifically Representative Gottwald, but also could you just please talk about the changes that have been made in this section, because I do think this is important and it deserves a little more discussion than it got in the beginning.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Loeffler, thank you for the question. I would remind members this bill also went through committee. I don't recall that question coming up, but you deserve an answer, Representative Loeffler. This came to, I'm sorry, Representative Liebling. I do that a lot. I don't know if you two are, you know, twins separated at birth or what, but I apologize, Representative Liebling. The answer to your question, this came from Nancy Zaleski and the counties. It was requested that this language be amended out. Again, members, this is what came through committee. I don't recall any questioning of this at the time. And again, there have been no amendments offered to this. There also has been no controversy about this particular deletion that I'm aware of. But if you have further questions about that, Representative Liebling, I'd be glad to answer them.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwald, I'm glad you'd be glad to answer them, because you didn't answer. You just said it went through committee and it wasn't controversial. You didn't tell me why it was taken out. Maybe you don't know why. But I certainly don't think that the fact that it went through committee means I shouldn't ask about it on the floor. So if he would yield again, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The lady from Olmsted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwald, if you don't know why, that's fine. I mean, but I wish that you would also, what I also asked you before was that you would just discuss a little bit more the changes, just explain to the body the changes that are being made in this section. Whether they're controversial or not, I think that's for people to be able to determine for themselves. And if you could just please explain what you're doing in this bill. Thank you.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwald.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, I think this is what Representative McDonald was referring to earlier. Please don't put words in my mouth, Representative Liebling. I thought I explained to you pretty clearly why this language was changed. This was a request brought to us by the counties. I would add that NAMI also signed off on this. These are changes that were brought to us by them and heard in committee. Nobody questioned why it was being done then. We have an additional communication from them that they want these goals to align with MFIP. So this is their reasoning. That's the reason it was put in the bill. So I hope it's clear to you, Representative Liebling, I am explaining the reason this language is changed in the bill. Now, if somebody had a problem with that language change or had concerns about it or even questions about it, members, this is why we have the legislative process. Now, I understand that floor debate is part of that process. So I'm glad you asked the question, but I'm giving you a straight answer, Representative Liebling. That is why the language is here. To my knowledge, this does nothing more than help align this with MFIP goals. I mean, it is a change. You deserve an answer to the question, but that is the long and the short of why this change is here. Now, again, we have no feedback from any stakeholder that this is a problem. And they had plenty of time to weigh in it. Both NAMI and the counties agree that this is a good change. So I just want to make very clear that this has been through the process, properly vetted. This is the reason we've been given why the language changes here. And again, I characterized it as non-controversial before, and that's what I meant, because until this moment we haven't had any controversy about this language.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Gottwald, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. I'm just asking a question. I think that's my right as a member. Whether it's been through the process or not, I think members have a right to ask and to receive an answer. And thank you. If I guess the answer is that it's aligning it with the MFIP goals. That's an answer. Not who brought it, not the fact that the question wasn't asked before, but the reason that was given why this should be changed. I appreciate that. We finally got to that. The other thing that I had asked you, Representative Gottwald, is to explain the rest of the section, what changes are being made here. Now, I'm not saying it's controversial. I'm not making it controversial. I'm not arguing with you about it. I'm simply asking you to give the body a little more explanation. And frankly, if I had been called on before third reading, I think Representative Loeffler might have had a chance while we talked about these issues to get ready to make her amendment or get it written up. I don't know. But anyway, I just think that when we have a bill like this, that the members deserve to hear what's in the bill and just get a little more explanation from the author. And that's all I'm asking for, Representative Gottwald.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll try and stretch high and wave my hand, but I think for those of us who are vertically less advantaged than others, sometimes it's hard on this floor for you to see everyone who respectfully is trying to participate in the process. And what I want to call members' attention to is the Article 3 in this particular bill, which I mentioned has been approved by this body in a different form. And this has to do with our seniors and people receiving home care in the community. And I know many of you are concerned, as all of us are, about the growth in health and human services costs within our state budget. And one of the fastest growing areas, and one that, and quite honestly, we should be proud of, is the provision of home care and community-based services so people can avoid going into nursing homes or other expensive institutional care. And we have always required for someone to get this assessment, and it's part of our agreement with the federal government, that they will have an objective assessment of their needs by a public health nurse or a social worker who's trained in that area to determine what they really need to meet their health needs, to meet their safety needs, but not get anything more. You know, it's the Goldilocks thing. You got to get just the right amount, and we have professionals who are objective making that assessment. Maybe some of you have gone through that with a family member. This is a major policy change. This would say the provider, the person who's going to get paid to take care of grandma, gets to put in their own assessment, and that assessment must be used in establishing how much care grandma needs. And it also provides that you know, we have this same provision for people with disabilities. It was amended in the Finance Committee with the support and assistance of Ann Henry from Disability Services, the Ombudsman's Office, AARP representing our seniors, to say that, first of all, the person providing input, if it's a provider, has to be someone who's worked with that person. Has to be someone who knows that person, not someone from the corporate office whose job is to maximize the receipts from the state. It should instead be someone who actually knows that person and and has cared for that person. This proposal in the bill that is in Representative Abler's Conference Committee provides for that. I think we want to make sure that nobody gets more than they need just because a provider wants a higher number of hours, and nobody gets less than they need to be safe and healthy. And I think there's never been a demonstrated problem with that. There's appeals processes, there's all kinds of other things that people can use. I also believe, and you know, Representative Daudt, would you yield? One of the issues that this doesn't address, but that the bill that is in conference committee addresses, is the whole issue of notice to the person or themselves or their legal representative. And I believe that as written right now, this bill has a legal problem with the federal HIPAA law because it provides health information about an individual without providing information to that person, a copy of that information to that person or their representative. And would you explain to me how you believe this is in compliance with that requirement?
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The gentleman from Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Loeffler, and I've got it right, not Representative Liebling. Representative Loeffler, as we discussed in committee, I think obviously you've done some thinking about this. I appreciate that. But I would point out, members, this section of language was arrived at after long discussions and negotiations of over a year with the long-term care provider community and other stakeholders. So there will be some disagreement between Representative Loeffler and some of the groups she mentioned and what is represented in the bill. That is intentional, members. We happen to have a disagreement, as sometimes happens with legislation. You question whether it complies with HIPAA, Representative Loeffler. I think that it's fine. And we can debate how or whether we think it complies or not. But I would say again, members, this language was arrived at after long and careful discussion and negotiation. Representative Loeffler applied some of her thinking as a legislator. I respect that, and offered an amendment that went on in the Health and Human Services Finance Committee, but it did not go on in my committee as this bill passed through, and we in fact have had communication from the long-term care provider community and others that they want this language kept in and negotiated as is. So members, again, I would encourage support for the bill and support for this language. Thank you.
The lady from Hennepin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Chair Gottwald, I'm sorry you didn't answer the question, which is currently HIPAA law requires that any information about your health has to be provided to you and or your legal representative if you're not competent. And this does not provide for that in making that determination. And why is that really important? You know, when each of us becomes old and somebody's going to decide how much care we're going to have, we qualify for, and who's going to provide it, we don't want to, just because our body is falling down, have to give up our ability to have any input into our own care. And this means somebody can be saying things and recommending things about our care without us having a chance to even see it, to argue against it, or to understand why the decisions are being made. So I do believe this. But I think more importantly, for every single senior citizen who gets these home care, this just says this decision will affect what their inheritance is by their children. Because if that senior is a homeowner, There is a lien against their property that is going to be put against the payment for the payment of these services. And if more services than they minimally need are authorized and those are established, those will become a lien against their estate. And so this is an issue of deep concern to both the senior and to their family members. And I think we have a pretty good solution, and we're continuing to discuss it with the provider community as it goes into the other conference committee. But we do need, I think, to honor our traditional process, which is to have objective people assessing one's level of need, not the person who's going to get paid the most if more care than is necessary is authorized. If we want to take control of the Health and Human Services budget, I think this is a really important point. I think we can make sure that there's informed advice from the provider community without them controlling it. The negotiations that took place primarily involved other providers. They did not involve AARP. They did not involve the senior ombudsman. It did not involve the broader people who look out for the interests of the people being served. And on that basis, I'm disappointed, Representative Gottwald, that you are not willing to honor the work of the Health and Human Services Finance Committee and to have this language conform to that.
Discussion. The gentleman from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just some quick clarifications here. And I think Representative Loeffler knows this, too. I mean, HIPAA law is federal law. It supersedes anything that we're doing here. So in terms of disclosure of information, privacy of information, all of that is contained in HIPAA. It supersedes whatever we are doing. I would also point out that on line 9.2 of the bill, it says services may submit a copy of the provider's nursing assessment. This is permissive language. It's not a mandate. So, members, I guess I disagree with some of Representative Loeffler's characterization. I respect her good work on this and her good thinking around it. But again, members, this has been through a legitimate process. This is language that's been developed over a year, and I'd ask for your support.
Discussion. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I echo Representative Loeffler's pointing out that those of us who are short sometimes have trouble getting noticed in this busy place. But I want members to really pay attention to what Representative Loeffler is saying. I know we may look alike. Most of you, I hope, can tell us apart. But she is really pointing out here the difference between listening only to the industry and listening to the seniors to whom the care is going to be provided. And I think it's really telling here that Representative Gottwald keeps going back to telling us how the process was followed. Well, the process was followed, and Representative Loeffler was able to amend this language in the Finance Committee, which is very important. Members, I think most of this bill is pretty non-controversial, and as Representative Gottwald initially told us, but I'm very troubled about this discussion. I'm troubled that the majority didn't want to bring us back after a mistake was made so that we could actually have a chance of fixing this bill, because I think this could have been fixed. The amendment was passed in the Health and Human Service Finance Committee, and I don't remember that it was very controversial there at all. I think the chair might have probably accepted the amendment. I think it was, if I recall correctly. So this shouldn't have been controversial. This should have been a fix that simply should have been done if Representative Loeffler had been allowed to offer her amendment. But the majority didn't want to take back the mistake of the chair, and so I'm going to vote no on this bill, although I otherwise would have voted for it. I'm going to vote no on this bill because I don't like the processes that have been followed here, and I don't think this is the way we ought to conduct ourselves as a body. So I'm going to urge other members to vote no as well, and maybe this can be fixed later on in conference committee if it passes this floor.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, well, how very, very disappointing to have members of our own committee mischaracterizing a bill that really is about the patients. Certainly we have heard a lot of input, both from the department, Representative Liebling and Representative Loeffler, both from the department, the providers, and other stakeholders. Members, read the language in the bill. Read the language in the bill. Existing law, the assessment must be conducted in a face-to-face interview with the person being assessed. Further along it says, for persons who are to be assessed for elderly waiver customized living services, with the permission of the person being assessed or the person's designated or legal representative, the client's current or proposed provider of services may submit a copy. May, permissive. This involves the people receiving care. It follows HIPAA law, which supersedes anything we do here anyway. Members, this is absolutely respectful of seniors who receive care. This section of this bill deserves your support bipartisanly because of the manner in which it customizes and reforms the way we're delivering services to these people. This was brought forward nonpartisanly by other stakeholders, including the department, which has participated in the discussion about this. The Dayton administration wants to sign this bill. Why are you throwing up these barriers? Because you weren't recognized? Come on, members. We just heard Representative Thiessen lecture us about how we should be working together and cooperating to get good work done. This bill is good work, bipartisan and nonpartisanly. It deserves not only your green vote on the floor today, it deserves the governor's signature. Members, vote green.
Discussion. The clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. Clerk will close the roll. There being 114 ayes and 17 nays, House File number 2627 as amended is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2647. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2647, number 10 on the supplemental calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to education.
The lady from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Mr. Speaker, members, House File 2647 came out of an issue that it was in my House district, in my school district 191. There was a settlement agreement for more than $250,000, and parents and taxpayers alike were very concerned about this. They wanted more information, but the school board said that they were restrained from giving more information because of the law. And so what this bill strives to do is give more clarity. Mr. Speaker, I do have an author's amendment.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Myra and others moving to amend House File 2647, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A7.
The lady from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Mr. Speaker, members, I'd like to point out that Amendment 7 was signed by all members of the Civil Law Committee. And also, there is a letter that's being distributed, and it's from the Director of the Minnesota Department of Administration. In that letter, it states that Amendment 7 does not create any unnecessary consequences. Also, it goes on to say that it provides clarity. I'd like to take a few minutes to explain the amendment. Under current Minnesota statute, section 1343, subdivision 2, paragraph 6, the terms of any agreement settling any dispute is public data. Amendment 7 adds the word complete before the word terms. So that section reads, the complete terms of any agreement settling any dispute is public data. Mr. Speaker, members, another change is under current Minnesota statute, for payments involving more than $10,000 of public money, the agreement must include specific reasons. Amendment 7 adds the words all of the before specific reasons. So the statute would read, so the agreement must include all of the specific reasons for the agreement if it involves the payment of more than $10,000 of public money. Mr. Speaker, members, under current Minnesota statute, all the data relating to the complaint or charge are public upon completion of an investigation of a public official. Public official under current statute includes only high-level officials like heads of state agencies. House File 2647 adds local political subdivisions. Amendment 7 clarifies management capacities on lines 1 through 7 to 1 through 17. This amendment and bill has the support of the Minnesota Newspaper Association, also MICA, and the League of Minnesota Cities is okay with it, and also members of the public who are watchdogs over data practices are supporting it as well. Members, I would appreciate your green vote, and again, the members of the Civil Law Committee have all signed on to this amendment. Thank you.
Discussion to the amendment. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Myra yield for a question?
The lady from Dakota will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Myra, I'm just reading through the amendment here, and I'm looking on lines 1.12, and it talks about a city with a population of more than 7,500 or a county with a population of more than 5,000. Do we have any counties that are less than a population of 5,000?
The lady from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Mr. Speaker, Representative, yes, there are 8 counties that are less than 5,000.
Gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Myra continue to yield?
The lady from Dakota will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Myra, then for those counties, why would we not want the same level of coverage for transparency? I mean, I would think that we would want to have any information that would apply to the other counties be equivalent, that it should just be counties rather than excluding counties with a smaller number of population.
The lady from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker, Representatives, that is a very good question. What we are adding here is clarity that we haven't had. This portion of statute has been in place for 17 years, and up till now, it only covered top-level state agency heads. We are adding a significant increase in clarity here. The concern of some stakeholders is this would put an unnecessary or too great of a burden on these really small counties that have that they're just so small, and they're the payout would probably be, everything would be smaller because of their size. So, but in reality, what we're adding here in this section is significant greater clarity and transparency that we haven't had in the last 17 years.
The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Meyer, I agree that we should have that transparency. My concern is the fairness question, because you could have a problem that occurs in a small county that could be a big problem. You could have a big county that has a small problem. But I would think that we'd want equity in terms of protection for our citizens throughout the counties, whether they're a small county or not. I would think the responsibility would be the same for those elected officials, whether they're in a small county or not. So I don't know if there's any additional discussion on this. I'm going to just look at this one more time, and if possible.
Discussion to the A7 amendment. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it possible to do an oral amendment to this amendment?
Yes, it would be.
Yes, it would be. Then, Mr. Speaker, I would like to move to strike on line 1.12 after the word county, the words with a population. And then on line 1.13, the words of more than 5,000.
To the gentleman from Dakota, are you working off the amendment, the A7 amendment?
The A7 amendment.
All right, okay.
If you please restate your oral amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The oral amendment would be on lines 1.12 to strike the words after county with a population, and then on lines 1.13 to strike the words of more than 5,000.
That doesn't fit, does it?
The clerk will report the oral amendment.
Hanson moving to amend the Myra amendment as follows on line of her amendment on line 1.12, delete the words with a population, after county, delete the words with a population. On line 1.13, delete of more than 5,000.
Discussion to the Hanson amendment to the amendment. Gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Meyer, I'd hope you consider this maybe a friendly amendment. I think it just provides transparency and clarity for all counties, and I would hope it could be supported.
The lady from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Mr. Speaker and members, what I would like to do is draw your attention higher up on the amendment to line 1.8. 1.8 says the chief administrative officer or the individual acting in an equivalent position in all political subdivisions. So every county's CAO would be subject to this, okay? In lines 1.12 through 1.14, what we're talking about there is for cities with a population of more than 7,500 or counties with a population of more than 5,000, individuals in a management capacity reporting directly to the chief administrative officer or an individual acting in an equivalent position. So all individuals who are chief administrative officers, no matter what their population, would be subject to this. Except, farther down there, the population would be the individuals reporting to that. And so, members, I would ask that you would vote against this oral amendment.
The lady from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think you should be aware of the counties that this might consist of. Certainly Monoman, and we know Monoman always has issues with their taxes and their ability to raise property taxes because they're property poor. Kitson, Lake of the Woods, Red Lake, Traverse. So I think what Representative Myra has done here is, I'm sure, work with the Association of Minnesota Counties and take into consideration what she's just said about who will be held accountable and the transparency, and then on the other side of the coin, the property poorness of these counties, and that's not to let them off the hook, but for us to realize that some of the counties that she's referring to are the poorest in the state, and for that reason, I think they've been itemized here as those that would apply in line 112 that the representative is trying to amend orally. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And Representative Hansen, I think what they were trying to get at with this low population threshold is that in these very small population counties, you may have somebody who works for the county that it may be even hard to discern whether or not they're in the management capacity. They may be the only person in the county that's maybe plowing, doing tree work, and so in those counties with very few employees, very few residents, this seemed to be an issue with the Association of Minnesota Counties, and that we still have the manager of that county is included by the language that Representative Myra pointed out further up in the amendment. But just to be able to discern what the nature of a particular job description is in a county where you have employees that may be a jack of many trades, for lack of a better word, and not wanting them to be subjected to this language.
Discussion. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the debate here, because looking at this, I understand those smaller counties where there may be the difficulty in responding, but if there was a problem, let's say if there was a large payout, then that would almost hurt them more. You know, that a big payout that maybe not the chief officer, but someone who's in a position that reports to the chief officer. The way I understand the clarification here is under 1.8, the chief administrative officer or the individuals acting in an equivalent position in all subdivisions would still be subject to this, but in the counties less than 5,000, individuals in a management capacity reporting directly to the chief would not, if they are under 5,000. And I understand you may have a county manager, and maybe you have a parks person who is also the snowplow person who's also doing something else. My worry here is if there is a problem, and we don't know where problems will occur, they could occur anywhere, that the fairness issue would be that transparency would be there whatever their position is. I understand the question about the response and the cost, but if there was a big problem, those citizens should have the same ability to see that as the others.
Discussion. The lady from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my point wasn't about the parity or about the money. I think what we're trying to accomplish here is parity across different counties with similar types of job classifications. In other words, in a county like Dakota, we are not subjecting this particular language to all county employees, only those in a management capacity. And so when you get into the very, very small counties, it's hard to discern. So it was more of a parity issue with other county employees in counties that were larger.
Discussion to the oral amendment to the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The oral amendment is not adopted. To the amendment. Discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The amendment is adopted. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2647, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill as amended. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 131 ayes and 0 nays, House File number 2647 as amended is passed and its title agreed to. Members, we are not going to go into recess, but we're going to take possibly about a 15-minute pause to wait on messages from the Senate. So we will just take a brief pause here. We are not actually in recess. We're waiting for some messages from the Senate. The gentleman from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Representative Dean moves that the calendar for the day be continued. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. The lady from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, it's my intention to place House File 518 Leidiger, Senate File 506 Szymanski, House File 2580 Loon, House File 2729 Loon, House File 2958 Holberg, and House File 2754 House on the fiscal calendar for Tuesday, April 17th, 2012.
We will revert to messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate file numbers 1534, 2058, 1808, 2112, 2295, 2379, 2421. Signed, Kel R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading, Senate files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1534, an act relating to agriculture. Vogel moves that Senate File 1534, House File 2226, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
There being no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2058, an act relating to education. Erickson moves that Senate File 2058, House File 2310, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
There being no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1808, an act relating to retirement. Lanning moves that Senate File 1808 and House File 2199, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
There being no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2112, an act relating to claims against the state. Smith moves that Senate File 2112 and House File 2437, now on the calendar for the day, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
There being no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2295, an act relating to public safety. The bill has been referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform. Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2379, an act relating to courts. Szymanski moves that Senate File 2379, House File 2680, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
There being no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2421, an act relating to state government. The bill has been referred to the Committee on Legacy Funding, being referred to the Legacy Funding Division.
There being no objection, so ordered. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on those motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Beard moves that House File 1666 be returned to its author.
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Beard.
Mr. Speaker, yes, that's my bill. It's not going to move this year. I'd like to just return to the author. Thank you.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Announcements. The lady from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The House Ways and Means Committee will reconvene at 5 p.m. in room 200.
Announcements. The gentleman from Anoka, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Health and I know this is news y'all been waiting for. The Health and Human Services Omnibus meeting will be tomorrow night, a half hour after the last body adjourns. You're all free to come. There will maybe be snacks, so please come. I think it's in room 200, but watch for the announcement about that.
Announcements. The gentleman from Washington, Representative, the gentleman from Meeker. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, tomorrow is one of the days that you've been waiting for all session long. It is Cheese Day.
Announcements. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Tuesday, April 17th, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Tuesday, April 17th, 2012. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. Representative Dean.
I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, April 17th, 2012.